Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to the Western Hemisphere, and welcome to the webinar series of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. I am Gaukhar Mukhatzhanova, Director of International Organizations and Non-Proliferation Program here at the VCDNP, and I'm really glad to be moderating today's webinar, which is dedicated to the upcoming second meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is scheduled to take place in New York from November 27th to December 1st this year. So today we will review some of the key outcomes of the first meeting of the states parties to the TPNW and discuss the progress of intersessional work, the status of preparations for the second meeting, and priorities, goals, and expectations of states parties, as well as civil society ahead of the second meeting of states parties. And to discuss these issues, I'm really glad to have a fantastic lineup of speakers who are, in order of their appearance, Ambassador Alexander Kmentt, who's the Director for Disarmament, Arms Control and Non-Proliferation at the Foreign Ministry of Austria and President of the first meeting of states parties, the TPNW. He'll be followed by Ms. Tonie, Coordinator for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico. She is on the presidency team of the second meeting, which is going to be presided by Mexico. We will also have Dr. Patricia. She is a co-chair of the TPNW Scientific Advisory Group and International Security Program Director at Chatham House. And finally, we have Alicia Sanders-Zakre, who's Policy and Research Coordinator at the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN. Today's webinar, I must say, is a part of the series that is conducted with the generous support of the Austrian Foreign Ministry, and for that we are grateful. Before I switch to the substance matter of the webinar, I'd like to note that if you, the participants, want to pose questions to the panelists, please use the Q&A function on Zoom. And if you are watching us on YouTube and want to ask a question, please send us an email at events@vcdnp.org. So with that, I'm going to start with the speakers. And first to you, Alexander. I would like to ask first of all, your views on what the mandate and goals are for the meetings of states parties as mandated by the treaty. And also, given that you were the president of the first meeting, you presided over the adoption of a set of outcomes in June 2022 that included a political declaration and an action plan. So it would be wonderful if you highlight some of the key points of those outcomes and highlight the progress of the intersessional work that has been ongoing since the first meeting of states parties. So please, Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the invitation to speak. We're very happy, of course, and look forward to the second meeting of states parties. I have to say, it's 3 weeks before the second meeting of states parties, and I'm significantly more relaxed now than I was 3 weeks before the first meeting of states parties. I'm happy to talk about the first meeting of states parties and answer the questions that you asked me. Specifically, what does the treaty say about states parties, meeting of states parties? That's regulated in Article 8, and it doesn't say very much. It doesn't say very much specific. It's essentially states parties are, the reason for states parties is for states parties to meet on a regular basis and to consider, and where necessary, take decisions in respect to any matter about the implementation of the treaty and its provisions, as well as on further measures for nuclear disarmament. That's more or less the quote of Article 8. This includes, of course, issues related to the implementation of the treaty. It specifically mentions measures for the verified, time-bound, and irreversible elimination of nuclear weapons programs, and very broadly, any other method pursuant to and consistent with the provisions of the treaty. Other than that, it only specifies that the first meeting had to take place within a year of entry into force, which is, of course, the first thing that we broke due to COVID. We had to postpone the meeting for half a year. And then it says that further meetings, unless otherwise decided, should take place on a biennial basis. And then it specifies that after 5 years, a review conference should take place. So the treaty itself doesn't say very much. It's an opportunity on the purpose of states parties. It's simply an opportunity for states parties to get together and review and take decisions on the functioning of the treaty. So for the first meeting of states parties, this was, of course, a very special meeting, a very specific meeting, because the treaty itself is not very specific on how meetings are to be conducted and what decisions are to be taken and how to set up the implementation of the treaty. As such, these were all things that had to be discussed and decided upon at the first meeting of states parties. So it was really important to take decisions that would put the treaty on a track for the implementation. And of course, it was also very important given the political environment, given the contestation around the nuclear weapons issue in general, and also let me say it like that, the skepticism and antagonism of some actors vis-a-vis the TPNW. So the purpose of the first meeting of states parties was really to, first of all, demonstrate the seriousness behind this enterprise, the seriousness of the treaty, the seriousness of commitment of states parties, and the seriousness of taking this issue forward in a very inclusive and cooperative way, based on how we had worked in the process of getting to the treaty. So it's also a very, very inclusive process, and that was important. So one of the tasks of the first meeting of states parties was to agree on rules of procedure, which will now be the rules of procedure for how we work in the TPNW. And they are, I would say, very progressive and forward-leaning, in particular when it comes to the participation of stakeholders other than states parties, such as observer states or civil society actors. I think that was an important aspect. Then you mentioned yourself the two key outcome documents really was the Vienna Action Plan and the political declaration, which was entitled Our Commitment to a World Without Nuclear Weapons. So the action plan is foreseen and was discussed in many consultations with a sort of very spread out preparatory work. We had facilitators working and consulting on what should be included in the action plan on all aspects of the treaty. And it was really set up in a way that it should be a guide for the implementation of the treaty for the next few years. So not just until the second meeting of states parties, but for a longer period, really going to the first review conference. So for 5 years. And the action plan contains altogether 50 actions, which are spread over the issues how to promote the universalization of the treaty, and in a way also, which means not only getting more countries to join the treaty, but also to promote the humanitarian consequences and risk of nuclear weapons rationale on which the treaty is based. Secondly, the second segment of the action plan is how to operate in concrete terms, further develop the TPNW pathways for the elimination of nuclear weapons. This is a process which is foreseen to take a longer time, because these are decisions that don't need to be taken instantaneously, but that need to be discussed and prepared properly. The third segment is relates to the positive obligations of the TPNW, which is on victim assistance and environmental remediation, which is really a very novel aspect in the treaty, and of course of high relevance, because we have in the treaty states parties where large parts of the country and the people are still affected from past nuclear weapons testing, namely Kazakhstan and some of the Pacific Island states, and there is still a very important humanitarian legacy. So we are working on the basis of the action plan how to deal with this issue in a cooperative way, how to set up the implementation of that. In addition to this, we are working on the complementarity of the TPNW with the regime as a whole. We are working on the inclusivity, and we are working on the gender dimensions. So that's the action plan. We can, of course, talk about it more in detail later. The political declaration, that was really very important as well, was to have a stance agreed to by all states parties on how we see the current status related to nuclear weapons. Don't forget that in the other frameworks in the NPT, the views of the non-nuclear majority of states is often marginalized. And because we have to, we operate on the basis of consensus, we usually end up with text that does not really represent the view that I believe the vast majority of states hold. So that was really important to achieve that. I think we managed to get a very strong text, in particular against the current background of nuclear threats, of re-emphasis on nuclear weapons, and the very dire state of affairs of the whole nuclear regime. So to any of the listeners who hasn't had the chance to read this declaration, I would recommend to do that. I think the strong message TPNW states parties sent specifically on the unacceptability in all circumstances of threats was very, very timely. And I think we saw the impact of that text being taken forward, for example, in the G20 statements, both in Indonesia and in India just a few months ago. So I think that was very significant. The other set of decisions that we had to take was on the institutional framework. How are we going to work? So I talked before, what do we want to do, but how are we going to work? Of course, we're a young treaty in the sort of legal infancy, so to speak. We have resource issues, definitely. We don't have funds to set up complicated structures. Implementation of the treaty will be state party driven, which means that individuals from state party will take on responsibilities and work on the implementation and coordinate the work on the implementation. So we set up informal working groups on all those issues, mirroring the issues I raised, I talked about in the action plan. They have been established. They have been working now for several months. We established a coordinating committee chaired by the president, which coordinates this effort. And very importantly, we established a scientific advisory group at the first meeting of states parties, which Patricia is going to speak about in more detail. So I'm not going to do that. So part of what we are doing and going to do at the second meeting of states parties, because in the questions that you sent me, you also said I should speak about the expectations for the second meeting of states parties. I think this is a different type of meeting than the first meeting. It's not about how to establish things and how to put things on track, but to see and assess how does it work and what has been done. So to take stock and maybe do some readjustments where necessary. It's maybe less sort of exciting and new, because it is actually it follows the decisions from the first meeting of states parties. It's about now the sort of daily work on the implementation that is taking place, and which is of course ultimately the really important aspect. I would also expect a very strong recommitment from states parties to the treaty. We're working on a new political declaration. I expect Tonie will probably be talking about that, and I would close by saying that the case for the TPNW, the necessity of the TPNW, has, if anything, only increased in the little bit more than a year, given the situation that we see, and the TPNW is at the moment the one international development that tries to seriously argue for a way out of the nuclear weapons paradigm. I stop here. I've just now seen your message that it should be a minute. I don't know how long ago you sent it.
It's all right. Thank you very much, Alexander. Also, that was a great introduction and teeing up very nicely for our second speaker, Tonie Jaquez. As mentioned already, the second meeting is going to be presided over by Mexico, and Tonie has been one of the masterminds behind the humanitarian initiative and the TPNW to begin with, along with Alexander, I must say. And she's been working on the presidency team from the beginning. And so I really look forward to hearing from you about the Mexico presidency view on key priorities and goals for the second meeting, and how the preparations have been going, in any update you might have on the political declaration, as well as the action plan, and sort of your view on how the meeting is going to go. Tonie, please.
Thank you, Gaukhar, and also thank you to the Vienna Center for the interest and the opportunity to share some views with the participants about these issues. This is a very important a meeting, as Alexander said before me, and has made my job very easy. But the second meeting of states parties is not a meeting of a novelty or fireworks, in the sense that it has already established a lot of the mechanisms and platforms for states to engage and to continue implementing the treaty. The second meeting of states parties is, if I may use this word, the institutionalization or normalization of the implementation of the treaty. Sorry, I am a little bit sick. This is the natural course of life for many organs and mechanisms and platforms established by treaties. In the beginning, they create an expectation. They create a new forum, and also a new way to engage on a certain issue. And then when states parties continue implementing the provisions of the treaties, there is a sense of loss of momentum, but I don't think that this is the case with the TPNW. It's not a loss of momentum, but it is a normalization of the treaty. This is a treaty that has been rooted and established in the UN system, and it's a UN treaty. That's why it was very important to choose the headquarters of the UN as the venue for the treaty. This gives the correct signal that this is not a declaratory process or a political process. It is also a legal process in which the parties need to report and demonstrate their commitment to the provisions of the treaty. From the political point of view, the Mexican presidency has always been very clear about the practicalities of the meetings of states parties. We don't need to reinvent the wheel every year or every time that we have a meeting of states parties. We need to demonstrate the steadfast commitment of the parties to what we have already agreed. And I think that in this time and nature, in the moment that we are meeting, this is a very important political signal, because in other venues and in other treaties, not only in disarmament, the trend is to try to demonstrate that the previous agreements and obligations are not valid or are not current, or they have changed because of the international juncture. And we don't agree with that. So we need to continue implementing on what we have agreed. The action plan, as Alexander was saying in Vienna, was very clear about the priorities and about the activities that the parties were going to focus on. We are completely aware that there are a lot of activities pertaining to disarmament that are not going to be able to. The parties are not going to be able to implement, because the parties of the TPNW so far are only non-nuclear weapon states, are states without nuclear weapons, so they are not the ones that are in responsibility to implement. But there are other activities that can be done by the non-possessors that are also very important. And one of the first ones pertain to this demonstration of rejection to the nuclear option. And the declaratory part of the meeting is very important. I'm going to start by, continuing on the comments made by Gaukhar and also by Alexander, that the political declaration last year in Vienna was a very important achievement, because it was the only document agreed by a group of states on these issues in the whole year. And it demonstrates the position of these states that sometimes are not able to put their message through in the UN context or in the NPT context, because of the counterbalances sought by those that still defend or want to demonstrate the validity of nuclear weapons as a security measure. So the declaration, the political declaration in Vienna, demonstrated that there is a group of countries that is strong, that is not agreeing anymore, if I may say so, to this view that we need to counterbalance or to try to find some agreement to demonstrate that nuclear weapons are still valid. In fact, the whole process of the negotiation of the TPNW demonstrated that most of the countries of the world do not agree that nuclear weapons are a source of security. They agree that, in fact, nuclear weapons have been a part of the problem throughout the Cold War. And nowadays, more than ever, we see that this is part of the problem, not part of the solution, and that more and more countries adhering to, for example, extended nuclear deterrence doctrines, or these voices that are banalizing the use of nuclear weapons is the problem, and we need to provide a different view from that idea, and not normalizing these calls for the use of nuclear weapons or for the threat of use of nuclear weapons. So the Mexican presidency always knew that we needed to issue another political declaration. We waited until very recently to negotiate it, and we are in the process of that negotiation, because we wanted a declaration that was current and that was updated, not only technical updates on the Vienna Declaration, but also that gave some sense of the political moment that we're in. And we didn't want to start negotiations on the declaration. And then, as it has been happening over and over again, it had to change most of the paragraphs or the language because of the dramatic change or sudden change in the political atmosphere. I cannot, of course, share a lot of details on the political declaration because it's still being negotiated. But some of the challenges that I might be able to share in general terms is to find ways for the TPNW states parties to describe our concern about the current state of affairs without falling into the trap that has been recurrent in the UN system of politicizing the issue. So I think that many of the states parties of the TPNW, certainly my country, have been acting on their principles of focusing on the issues and not on naming and shaming. And this is a political principle that many of the states parties of the TPNW are very worried about. And we are doing our best to incorporate all the comments and all the concerns of all the TPNW parties, but without falling into that a very easy solution of blaming, naming, shaming, and politicizing the room instead of focusing on what the concern is about from the technical and the political point of view. Certainly, the most important concern is about the threat of use of nuclear weapons. And as I said before, the voices that are continuously trying to make the rest of the world, convinced that nuclear weapons are, the basis of the security, international security. So I think that those are the biggest challenges. From the point of view of the Mexican presidency, also the implementation of the action plan leaves us a very little room for innovation, because we need to demonstrate that we are working on what was set up, the course that was set up in Vienna. But yet we have been preparing some additional points that I will talk about very briefly now. One of these is one idea that the Mexican presidency is putting forward for the consideration of the states parties, which is how to make sure that the meetings of states parties are not repetitive or have some element of innovation or change, but without changing the provisions of the treaty or what has been agreed before, as I said. And we have prepared a decision that hopefully is going to be agreeable by all the parties, to let the further presidents to choose a theme to focus on the debate. This is done in other treaties, but it's very prominent in the General Assembly. The president of the General Assembly can choose an item or an issue that the general debate can be focused on. So we think that if we do that in the TPNW and further meetings, that is going to give a sense of opportunity to be different, and also it's going to become a more precise entry point for the general public, also for the civil society, for academia, and for all the member states to participate with a focused debate on issues. Setting the example, the Mexican presidency has picked up a theme for the general debate, which is the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. And this sounds like something that has been taken for granted. But we realized that we have not talked about this issue inside the UN headquarters in a formal meeting of the UN. We have been talking about this issue on side events, and of course in the humanitarian conferences, and also in the Vienna meeting, the first meeting of states parties. But this was not the only focus of the debate. And we think that because of what's happening currently, this is a focus that needs to be brought back to the UN headquarters and to the debate. So this is going to be the thematic focus and emphasis that we are asking the TPNW parties to consider in their debates and in their statements, so that they can continue working on this issue, especially since we already have the outcomes of the humanitarian conferences, but also the TPNW, but new research emerging, and many of the scientific work that maybe Patricia is going to focus also on in her segment, and is going to explain to the participants what the scientific advisory group is doing. But there is new research and new approaches and new projections, and we need to talk about that and continue talking about that in a formal setting. My last point is that the Mexican presidency has made a focus of the presidency in universality of the treaty, universalization. And this means, in the traditional terms, to have more signatures and more ratifications, of course. The TPNW has had a very good pace of ratifications. That's why it could enter into force in a rather rapid manner. But our point of view, from the point of view of Mexico, this is not only about new signatures or new ratifications, but also about inclusivity, about the possibility of participation by civil society, by academia, but also by the observer states and by countries that have not adhered yet to the treaty. So in our bilateral exchanges, we have been inviting every single member of the United Nations to participate in the meeting, either as a state party or as a signatory state or as a country that might not be ready yet to join the treaty, but could participate. And also we are inviting other countries that have been portraying their position as against the treaty. We don't want anybody to feel excluded, and we want everybody's to feel that it is their decision, and especially the governments, their sovereign decision to participate or not. So far, we have been receiving some very good response by some countries that are outside the treaty, but that are going to be participating as observers. And I think this is a valid point regarding universalization, because it ends breaches between the sectors of the room, but also because it demonstrates that the TPNW parties are ready to engage in dialogue and ready to consider and continue in the diplomatic dialogue that is much needed today. Thank you. This would be my last point, but of course I am ready to continue answering questions and commenting on what others are going to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tonie. This is a very, very useful update, very interesting points on the innovations that the Mexican presidency is planning to introduce, or already introducing. And certainly, the young treaty and young process has the benefit of learning from other processes and some of the lessons from the NPT review process, for example, where you really need to make sure you don't get stuck in inflexible structures. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what it translates into in real terms. So you already mentioned the Scientific Advisory Group and its mandate. So that, and Alexander also mentioned that as one of the decisions of the first meeting to establish Scientific Advisory Group to provide technical advice and guidance to states parties on issues relevant for the treaty implementation, and that covers both the broader humanitarian aspects as well as some of the questions related to verification, for example. So we're lucky to have the co-chair of the Scientific Advisory Group, Dr. Patricia Lewis. And Patricia, I would really appreciate your updates from the activities of the Scientific Advisory Group, what has been identified as main priorities, what the group has been up to in the last several months. And I note on the UNODA website that there are 2 reports from the Scientific Advisory Group. If you could briefly introduce us to what's in there, and what your expectations are from the meeting as the chair of the Scientific Advisory Group. Patricia, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gaukhar. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to be asked to participate in this meeting. I mean, we're very excited on the Scientific Advisory Group with the opportunity and the possibility of working with the states parties on developing our scientific understanding of nuclear weapons. So just to say that we started off with our mandate, which is really set out in detail in WP6, and really it is to report to the meeting of states parties and review conference about developments in scientific and technical fields relevant to the treaty, its goals, objectives and implementation, support capacity building through scientific and technical engagement with scientists, academia, civil society, etc., and provide advice upon request or recommendation to states parties, etc. So we established ourselves as a group of 15 people, nominated by some 11 countries. And we have been meeting online monthly. We've had 9 meetings so far, 1 online and 1 additionally in person, to which most of the 11 were able to attend, and if not, they were also online. in Vienna on the side of the NPT meeting. And we have, as a result of that, as you say, produced 2 reports. The first report is really just the report of our activities, explaining what we've done, how we went about it, what our framing was, and then also some thoughts about the establishment of a wider network of scientists who can help support the aims and objectives of the TPNW. And that's the way we're going about that. There are lots of questions that have been thrown up as a result of our work about how we sustain our work, how we go forward, how we can involve others, what sort of checks and balances, what sort of management, how we do this properly, that have been thrown up, and I can get into that in the Q&A if people are interested. We've also produced our substantive report, and that was specifically to report, and we see this, let me say, we see this very much as part 1. This is a very big, complex issue, and we were specifically mandated to address certain things. So one of those is the status and developments on nuclear weapons themselves. Then on the issue of the risks associated with nuclear weapons. Then on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. And then on nuclear disarmament and related issues. And on the nuclear disarmament and related issues, what we've looked at there is the issue of verification, in particular disarmament verification, safeguards, verification beyond nuclear materials, lessons from past verification initiatives, the issue of disarmament and delivery systems, and the test ban. Now, as I said, this is preliminary in the sense that this is part 1. This is our first ever meeting, first ever report for the meeting of States Parties number 2. And I guess the question that we have is, how we make sure that this is a sustainable process, how we make sure that it's as interactive as it possibly can be with States Parties at the TPNW, and how we make sure that what we are asked to deliver, we are able to deliver. I think as well, for all of us, it's very much about trying to gather the best of our understanding as to what's happened with nuclear weapons, the status of nuclear weapons, what the risks are, and so on, into a place to which all States Parties and others, of course, will have access. And to put it into a one-stop shop, if you like, a document. Now, a lot of it, of course, will have to be updated each time, because the numbers will change, hopefully in the negative direction going down, but nonetheless they will change. Our understanding of risks will change as things happen in real life. Risk is not a static picture. And our understanding about how to cope with those risks, how to mitigate those risks, the impact of technologies on those risks, etc., all have to be factored in going forward. So it won't be a report that will stand and never be updated. It will always be updated. And I think that's really important for States Parties to understand that this is a work in progress. So the issue of sustainability, as I said, is probably our biggest concern going forward. We're all doing this as volunteers. We have 15 of us, all of us working in our day jobs and doing this in our, does anyone have spare time at the moment? I don't know, but I suspect there is nobody on this this conference at the moment, this meeting, that has spare time, spare capacity. So we're all doing this on the side of everything else we're trying to do. We're all completely committed. I co-chair this with Professor Zia Mian from Princeton, many of you will know, but every single person on the Science Advisory Group has had an input. We have invited other people to our meetings as well, so we've brought in some expertise from the wider community. We'd like to do more of that going forward, of course, because that's part of our idea about the network and how we build on the network. So that's really where we are. I'm happy to take more comments on, or more questions or comments on any detail. You can read the reports online, as you say, and I hope that they're seen as a first start, a good beginning to the foundation of the work of the Scientific Advisory Group. Thanks, Gaukhar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I'm sure we'll return to some of the points, especially the one you raised on sustainability and how to keep this the group going. But before that, I would like to call on our fourth speaker, and Alicia Sanders-Zakre represents ICAN, who of course played a pivotal role from the civil society to push forward the humanitarian initiative and promote the negotiation of the TPNW. ICAN has also been active in promoting universalization and has been a partner to states parties ahead of the first meeting of states parties as well. So to you, Alicia, I have questions about what ICAN priorities have been since the first meeting of states parties. How has ICAN participated and broader civil society participated in the intersessional process that Alexander talked about? What are your expectations of the second meeting of states parties, and what can we expect from civil society, from ICAN, in terms of whether there's going to be a civil society forum or any other activities associated with the second meeting of states parties? So once again, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Gaukhar, and thank you to VCDNP for organizing this great event. Please bear with me as I have a bit of a cold, but I'm really glad to be here to speak about ICAN's role and priorities since the first meeting of states parties, our expectations for the second meeting, and what we're planning that week in New York. So first, touching on kind of what have ICAN's priorities been since the first meeting of states parties and how ICAN has engaged in this intersessional process. ICAN has really been quite an active partner in the intersessional process. This really speaks to what has been brought up earlier about the really inclusive nature of the treaty. In particular, we focused a lot on the work around Articles 6 and 7 on victim assistance and environmental remediation, on international cooperation and assistance, as well as, of course, on Article 12 on universalization, as was mentioned. Articles 6 and 7 are really groundbreaking, not only as creating the only international infrastructure to assist victims of nuclear weapons use and testing and clean up contaminated environments, but also because of the commitment to inclusivity and close consultation with affected communities. This was really spelled out in the Vienna Action Plan in Action 19, where states committed to closely consult with, actively involve, and disseminate information to affected communities at all stages of the victim assistance and environmental remediation process. This is something we've really seen happen in practice. The co-chairs of this working group have really demonstrated their commitment to inclusion, and ICAN in particular has played a role in helping to facilitate the active input of civil society and in particular affected communities into this process, including through circulating information, providing additional briefings and opportunities for civil society discussion and coordination ahead of these official working group meetings, which were open broadly to civil society. And this has also really informed, of course, ICAN's substantive input and recommendations throughout this process on each aspect of the work. Of course, we've also been very actively engaged on universalization work under Article 12 in coordination with the working group co-chairs, Malaysia and South Africa. Since ICAN is such an international coalition, we can really draw on our network of partner organizations around the world to help encourage signature and ratifications in each country and collaborates on pulling together regional initiatives. So for a few examples, Malaysia and South Africa co-sponsored a high-level ceremony in September 2022, which resulted in 5 states signing the treaty and 2 ratifying it. In January of this year, South Africa, in partnership with ICAN and the ICRC, hosted a 2-day seminar in Pretoria on universalization of the treaty in Africa. We've also collaborated with the ICRC and with the co-chairs of the Article 12 working group to convene working sessions with states and regional groups in New York and in Geneva to promote universalization. We also engage actively with parliamentarians and at the local governmental level in states not party to encourage the federal government to join the treaty, including by convening parliamentary briefings and coordinating a network of parliamentarians that support the treaty. So at this stage, campaigners and parliamentarians are actively encouraging governments that haven't already ratified or acceded to the meeting to observe as a state, as kind of a step towards joining, also acknowledging the very open and inclusive nature of these treaties. Another way that I would say ICAN has really engaged in this intercessional process is by seeking to provide general resources and support for states parties, including by producing briefing papers on subjects such as the complementarity of the treaty with other instruments. We've also developed a website where we seek to keep track of a lot of the intercessional work to brief states on that progress. Turning to our expectations of the second meeting of states parties, I think many of us are well aware that the TPNW meeting of states parties is really a unique forum at this point in the international sphere, in that it's actually working and reaching agreement on concrete actions to lower nuclear risks and work towards disarmament. That's incredibly rare and very important to maintain optimism about prospects for disarmament and retain people within the field. So that in and of itself, I think, is an important expectation and an aspect of the meeting. Substantively, we're really looking forward to the presentation of the reports of the working groups after following and inputting into the work over the year, and having this public demonstration of the really serious and constructive work of the past year to implement the Vienna Action Plan and to report on the next steps for the next phase of implementation of these agreements. As well as has already been mentioned, to a really strong political declaration that demonstrates once again the leadership of TPNW states parties in speaking out on the current nuclear context. Another expectation that we have is to continue the for a nuclear weapons treaty really unprecedented level of cooperation with civil society and highlighting of nuclear weapons survivor voices, including through some of these integrated debates between civil society and states that we saw the first meeting of states parties, and having this dedicated section on the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons that Tonie mentioned earlier. And I think maybe speaking to the first point, I'd say a final expectation is that this meeting, like last year's meeting in Vienna, is really a galvanizing moment for people around the world committed to working for a world free of nuclear weapons. I think we saw that the energy and dynamicism of being surrounded by people, be that activists, researchers, diplomats, who are really dedicated to nuclear disarmament and thinking creatively and working hard to actually make it a reality is really exciting and inspiring. And I think we all need that kind of inspiration in these times. Finally, going to the question of a civil society forum and events that are happening at the meeting of states parties. Essentially, we decided instead of organizing one big civil society forum, that this year we were going to have a week packed with different civil society events inside and outside of the UN to really engage every part of the ICAN campaign to take advantage of being in New York. Some of them are really targeted towards some constituents within the ICAN campaign and broader civil society. Others are very much open to the broader public to bring in more people to learn about nuclear disarmament and the treaty. The best way to see everything that's happening, because I unfortunately do not have enough time to cover all of that in my brief presentation, is to go to our website. I think Noah will be able to post that link for you in the chat. where we have a list of all the events that are happening, where and when, so you can follow along. But I will highlight some of the events that I think are really exciting. One is we're going to have a youth meeting of states parties. This is coordinated by our Youth for TPNW network. Really exciting series of workshops and panels to really bring youth leaders together, get them to gain experience in policy and campaigning and engage in the meeting. We'll have a parliamentarian for the TPNW conference. Last year, we had parliamentarians from over a dozen states coming together to recommit and engage to get their governments to join the treaty. There'll be an Artists Against the Bomb exhibition at the Judd Foundation, open to the wider public, way to spark conversation and debate on the issue. There'll be a private Wall Street event, a breakfast discussion with asset managers, asset owners, data and service providers, and nuclear experts to discuss divestment strategies. We'll have a particular session really dedicated for communities affected by nuclear weapons use and testing, to bring together survivors from around the world to have a chance to meet and strategize. Of course, a rally and a march. There's going to be a concert with the Philip Glass Ensemble. And then in terms of particular ICAN meetings, we will have a campaigners meeting the day before the start of the MSP, which is an opportunity for campaigners to get together and find out what's happening and get involved, and daily briefings each day before the start of the meeting for campaigners. So we're really looking forward to gathering in New York in a couple of short weeks for what promises to be a really dynamic and exciting week of events and diplomatic action to take forward the treaty. I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much, Alicia, and thank you to all the speakers. We already have questions coming in through the Q&A function. So a reminder to the participants in the Zoom webinar, if you have a question, please post it in the Q&A function rather than raising your hand. Or if you're following us on YouTube, send us an email on events@vcdnp.org. And so we have a couple of questions already that I think can be grouped thematically. But because I know that Alexander will have to leave us a bit earlier than others, I thought maybe I'll start with some of the questions. A question directed to you, and then we'll go to Patricia, because she's been asked a couple of questions directly, and Tonie. I see Alexander has taken the initiative to answer a question concerning the nuclear energy connection to the TPNW, which incidentally is none, as far as the practicalities go. So that's out of the way. But Alexander, since you presided over the first meeting that had to take a lot of the decisions on the sort of institutionalization process and intersessional work process, I wanted to hear your views on how it was envisioned back then and how it has worked in practice in terms of coordination between the presidents of different meetings, and how do you think it can continue to have some more continuity between the presidencies of different states meetings of states parties.
Thanks a lot. We actually took an interesting decision at the first meeting of states parties, that we decided that Mexico would chair the second meeting of states parties, and we designated Kazakhstan already at the first meeting of states parties as presidency for the third meeting of states parties. So we established at the first meeting an informal troika, essentially, which is very informal, but the idea, of course, is to ensure continuity. And I think we have been having regular exchanges, and I think are of a mind how important continuity is, and to keep the process informal and flexible, and so I think that has worked well. I don't think there is any divergence of views there. I don't know if Tonie wants to contradict me. Of course, you're free, but that has, I mean, as I said in my presentation, what we set up in Vienna was a very informal structure. And I think that was partly done out of necessity, because it's a young treaty with serious resource limitation. But it was also done out of the recognition that in the early phase of the treaty, it would probably be the best way to do it in that way, so we can easily make adjustments where necessary, and the implementation itself is informal, which then is being taken to the meeting of states parties where formal decisions can be taken. But all the implementation takes place in a very flexible and informal manner, and I think that's how we have been working in the preparation for the second meeting, and we will continue to work in the preparation for the third meeting of states parties, and probably towards the review conference as well.
Thank you. Tonie, did you want to add on this?
Sure, I want to add some comments. Okay, first on the issue of continuity, yes, we have been in constant communication with Austria and with Kazakhstan, so that we can ensure that there is continuity in the decision taking, but also some consistency, not contradictions amongst the approaches, so that the treaty can be seen as a consistent group of states reiterating all, but also recommitting to their rejection to nuclear weapons and the commitment to the prohibition. I think that I wanted to mention also, to add something that Alicia didn't mention about the very good work that ICAN is doing, and I think that it is very important because it has to do with some of the questions that have been put forward, which is outreach. We need to be very honest and clear about a fact, that is that not all the delegations of the UN members, and certainly TPNW members, have delegates following these issues or the implementation of the TPNW on a daily basis. Because of the composition of the delegations, many of them have small delegations following disarmament issues in New York or in Geneva or in Vienna. And ICAN has been very helpful in approaching all delegates, all delegations, to make sure that everybody is informed, and also these resources that they have prepared to help on some issues of the treaty, and some that are going to be issued for the meeting are going to be very helpful to have kind of a tabula rasa for all the delegations, because we are aware that not all delegations are aware at the same level. So I wanted to mention that and thank ICAN and all the participating organizations with ICAN and civil society in general for helping us do this outreach, and also for keeping us very aware that we need to be accountable to the states parties of the TPNW on the work that we need to do. My last comment has to do with some of the questions that have been put forward regarding the outreach and the work that the TPNW parties can do with non-state parties, or with parties that are openly rejecting the treaty. And I just want to reiterate what I said before, but and also what Alexander said, and what we have been saying from the negotiation of the treaty. This is a treaty that was convened by the General Assembly, and the countries that didn't want to participate, the delegations that didn't want to participate or take part in the negotiations, and are not wanting to take part in the meetings of states parties, not even as observers, have been doing that from their national perspective and positions, and it is their decision that we need to respect. We also want their delegations and their governments to respect our position, which is consistent to what we have been doing, the TPNW parties in the NPT, and also if we take into consideration that from all the non-nuclear weapon states of the NPT, 116 countries are parties to the treaties establishing nuclear weapon-free zones, and many of them are TPNW parties now, and also CTBT parties. So we see that what we are doing is to reiterate and to make our foundation of policy very strong. So this is our national interest that we are defending, and that is consistent with our obligations as states parties to this treaty and other treaties. So what we are doing is to continue inviting and opening the door for a discussion for levels of interaction. And I think that we have been very efficient in demonstrating that the TPNW parties are constructive. For example, we have had very constructive participation in the NPT context and also now in the new review cycle of the NPT.
It seems like Tonie's screen has frozen. All right. Hopefully we can revive the connection with Tonie, but in the meantime, maybe I'll turn to Alexander, sort of picking up on what Tonie was talking about, and that's the engagement and outreach to non-state parties. Oh, Tonie, are you back?
Yeah.
Sorry,
So
we lost you there for a
I just
bit.
wanted to mention that. Oh, I'm sorry, maybe the internet. So what I said is that the TPNW parties will always keep an open door or the opportunity for the non-states parties to engage with the TPNW parties, and we will continue finding outlets and entry points for our views in order to engage with the non-states parties. But I think that the door is open. One possibility is participation of observers, but as I said, if they want to do it, they can do it. If they don't want to do it, even if they are not basically opposing the treaty, there are some countries that don't want to participate for different reasons. But I think that the door is open, and the TPNW states parties meetings are going to be as inclusive as possible, and they will always allow for the participation of non-parties or even organizations or academia that are, not part of the TPNW already, but that would want to be incorporated into this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Tonie. There were a couple of questions in the Q&A concerning sort of the outreach to non-state parties, and they the two in particular about the possibility of G77 countries influencing China's position, if there's any positive dynamic in that regard, as well as how the positions within the EU on the TPNW affecting the prospects for universalization. Alexander, of course, Austria and Ireland, I believe, are still the only EU states that have ratified the treaty. How do you see that dynamic in the EU?
Thanks a lot. The question in the Q&A stream refers to an EU position on the TPNW. Let me clarify: there is no EU position on the TPNW because we do not have an agreement on the TPNW within the EU. There are three states that have ratified, 3 EU member states that have ratified the TPNW, one additional one that is a signatory, and then we have others that are not states parties. So we cannot agree within the EU on a position on the treaty, because the states parties, including Austria, we of course would like to say very positive things about the TPNW, and those that are not don't even want to mention it. So there is, however, a NATO position on the TPNW, and I think that's probably where the question really goes to. NATO has, since I think 2009, declared itself as a nuclear alliance and has taken a very clear position that it's not supportive of the TPNW. And the dynamic is that, of course, not much has changed. All of this plays against the background of geopolitical developments, which are very concerning for EU member states. I think for and NATO allies. I think the overarching motivation within NATO in light of Russia's aggression against Ukraine is to not have any issue that could be seen as divisive within NATO. So there is a very clear stance, and none of the NATO countries is breaking, showing any signs of changing this position. However, what of course we are doing and other countries are doing, we are engaging bilaterally with those countries, and the argument that we make is that the TPNW is now in force, building on what Tonie has just said before. So if it's a treaty in force and it is necessary to engage in a meaningful way, if the commitment to multilateralism and to nuclear disarmament is serious, as of course all EU member states maintain, then from our perspective it is necessary to engage constructively with a new treaty that has been established by the General Assembly, specifically a community of countries that has spoken out very clearly against nuclear threats, that is very committed to nuclear disarmament. In light of the nuclear threats that have been issued by Russia, it is really necessary for countries that are not yet ready to formally join the TPNW to at least engage constructively with the TPNW and specifically engage on the very profound arguments on which the treaty is based, the humanitarian consequences and the risks, and what it means for common security of all. And I think these are, the TPNW is therefore based on very legitimate security concerns of countries that are rightfully worried about the humanitarian consequences and risks. And I think it's about time that countries that have taken a negative view against the treaty, we of course fully respect their right not to join the treaty. That's absolutely clear, but it would be politically really necessary to start engaging more positively. And I think it was positive at the first meeting of states parties that a number of countries that maybe for the foreseeable future will not join the TPNW understood that and decided that it is in their own interest to demonstrate a level of constructive engagement with this new treaty. So I think that's in a way still where we are, and I hope that the more we demonstrate the seriousness in which we work in this treaty, that it is really important, given the precarious nature of the nuclear regime at the moment, that there is a more constructive attitude and engagement towards the treaty. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. We have some questions concerning the scientific advisory group, so I'm going to pack them together and address them to Patricia and also partially to Tonie, perhaps, because it also concerns, I think, the mandate of one of the working groups having to do with verification. We just lost Tonie, and then looks like her internet is jumping, so hopefully she'll be back. So to you, Patricia, one question is about the composition of the scientific advisory group, whether it's subject to further expansion in membership, and whether scientists from non-state parties can participate. That's an easy question. And the question on the engagement to non-state parties as it concerns the scientific advisory group is whether you foresee engaging non-state parties, and that's sort of related to the membership question. But also to tie it to more specifically some of the existing initiatives on nuclear disarmament verification, in particular, if the scientific advisory group plans to engage with some of those initiatives, or at least attempt to, such as IPNTV or the Quad, considering that the subject matter, of course, is related. And also, Tonie, I was mentioning you before because Mexico, along with being the president of the second meeting, also co-chairs the group, working group on Article 4 on disarmament verification. And so here again is the question of whether the working group has attempted or planning to engage with some of the disarmament verification initiatives that exist and involve in many cases states that are not party to the TPNW. So Patricia,
thank you.
Tonie first. We'll go to Patricia first because I posed some questions to her, and let you take a breath. Oh, and Alexander has to leave very shortly, so thank you very much for joining us, Alexander. And
I'm sorry that I have to leave. Thank you very much for organizing this meeting and for inviting me to it. Thank you.
thanks to you. Okay, Patricia, over to you.
Thank you. I'll do my best. So I think Carlo, hello, Carlo. I think you were asking about the membership in terms of numbers of the scientific advisory group, and the answer is that according to the mandate, it's 15 members is the maximum. So at the moment, that's the amount that we have. And I do think, though, in terms of sustainability, that we need to be aware that over time, some of those people will leave, won't be able to continue, etc. So we need to keep on thinking about who should be on that. At the moment, we've got a very good balance in terms of regional capacity, in terms of expertise, cognitive diversity, etc. We want to make sure that we keep that always in mind. And then in terms of non-state party scientists, at the moment I would say that that's not what has been decided, but we have looked at this issue for the wider scientific network. So we believe that the scientists who will eventually be invited to join the network are scientists who support the goals of the treaty. So they could indeed, depending on their own personal commitment, come from other countries. And we think this is important because there are many scientists who, by accident of birth or accident of where they work, etc., may indeed support the aims and the goals of the treaty and could make a valuable contribution to our work. But that doesn't necessarily mean they could be on the advisory group, because that's really for, they were nominated, those nominated by the states parties. So I think then the other issue about interactivity. So we have planned for a lot of interactivity in New York. And we have meetings on Monday with researchers. We've got various meetings throughout the week, but on the Friday, we have a meeting first thing in the morning with NGOs. And we have also brought in civil society experts into our meetings to brief us. So as we go on, we'll obviously be doing more and more of that. So that's definitely something that we are keen to carry on doing and increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Tonie, from the working group on verification, how has that worked out in terms of interacting with other initiatives on disarmament verification?
Hi, I hope that you can hear me because I have been having a very unstable network. Sorry for that, the broadband. From the working group is not only about verification, it's about all the provisions on Article 4. And the focus on the working group is to seek the views and continue the conversation with the states, TPNW parties, primarily on how to advance some of these provisions. For example, the possible establishment of a competent authority in the future. And the consultations have been going around with the states parties for the moment. So we have not engaged officially or formally with any other initiatives in that shape and form, because the working group has been focusing on consulting the states parties on how to continue the conversation that was established in the first meeting of states parties as a mandate for the group clearly established. I am not saying that we are not interested or that this is work that is not going to be done, but at the moment, I think that the group is also waiting and relying on the discussion of the scientific advisory group on this issue that has indeed engaged with some participants of other processes. And some of the TPNW parties have also participated in these other processes regarding verifications. Some others have not. But the essence of my comment is that the working group had a mandate to talk about all the obligations expressed in that article and consulting the states parties at the moment. I just wanted also to mention that the verification aspect of the TPNW is one that raises a lot of questions, and that is always creating the idea that this is not something that is going to be possible. But I think that the sense of the states parties, or what I have picked up from the group of the Article 4, but also from consultations with other states parties, is that the TPNW parties are very aware that this is an issue that cannot be done by the states parties at the moment. That is not a matter of urgency or not. Of course, we think that this is an urgent matter. We would like a nuclear weapon possessor to join the TPNW, and so that we can continue implementing all the provisions regarding disarmament and verification. But at this stage, since all the parties of the TPNW are non-possessors, this is a matter that has or that deserves to be further discussed, and that we don't have a pressure or rush for establishing an authority, for example, at this stage. That doesn't mean that it is not a priority issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tonie. There's a question concerning the participation of civil society, particularly the funding aspect. So what I want to highlight is that we know that there is already a sponsorship scheme in place to help some of the states parties to attend the meeting. But what about civil society participation? Is there some kind of sponsorship funding arrangement to help civil society members, especially from countries that are in financial difficulty, that can't support their participation? Is there some kind of help for civil society members? And perhaps I'll turn to Alicia first for that question.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's very true that having a meeting in New York does pose a challenge for global civil society participation, both in terms of visa processing, cost of hotels, etc. And we fully acknowledge that and set to prepare early for that. So ICAN did provide a sponsorship, particularly for campaigners, focusing on those coming from the global South, as well as those from communities affected by nuclear weapons use and testing. And so while it certainly is a challenge to be able to bring everybody who would like to come to New York there, I think we are glad that there will be quite a broad representation there, due to coordinated efforts, and I'd say many lessons that we learned as a campaign about visa processing, etc., from the last meeting. Although I really did emphasize a lot of the events that are happening in New York, I think it's also important to note that there will be plenty of virtual events happening. There'll be a global day of action coordinated by ICAN, where people around the world can engage in actions and activities in support of the treaty, even if they can't make it to New York. And we'll be really actively trying to involve people from around the world in informing them about what's happening and giving them a chance to engage. One way that we're doing that is through what we call MSP TV, which is a twice daily virtual broadcast that's kind of summary, highlights, insights from everything that's happening in New York. And that happens twice a day at 11 and 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern time throughout the entire nuclear ban week. That will be streamed on ICAN social media and on our website. So it's a great way for people to still be engaged with what's happening in New York, even if it's challenging for them to get there.
Thank you. That's really good, encouraging to hear. So of the questions that we have online, there's one I find interesting, and that's about the potential impact of the de-ratification of the CTBT by Russia. How do you think that might affect the TPNW, if at all? in terms of its implementation and purpose. So I'm going to just throw it out there for the volunteer to take it on. Patricia's nodding. Yes, please.
Yes, I mean, it's obviously a really retrograde step and very distressing, but I think it serves to underline and underscore the importance of the TPNW and everything that TPNW is trying to achieve as we increase in the risky behaviors of states that possess nuclear weapons, which have included threats, which have included rhetoric that increases hostility, which has recently, for example, included not picking up a hotline. All of these things with the backdrop then of so-called de-ratification underscores the importance. And I think, I don't know if Tonie will address this, but I think their justification to be at the same level as China and the US, what about the same level as all the other states that have ratified it and that they've joined? Do they want people to follow suit? This is a dreadful step in terms of the way in which we need to reinforce, not undermine these measures that help constrain and provide the checks and balances against the risks involved.
Thank you. I think I saw Tonie's hand, and Tonie, you're welcome to. Oh, and Alicia. So Tonie, and then Alicia before we do some wrap up before we run out of time.
Yeah, I think that on this issue, I don't know if there's going to be a negative impact, because unfortunately, non-nuclear weapon states have been accustomed to seeing nuclear weapon states erode the architecture of treaties that sustain the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime. If you look at the decisions, for example, or the decision-making processes and bodies at the UN, for example, the Conference on Disarmament, no nuclear weapon state has ever opposed consensus or has denounced a treaty of this issue. Historically, it has always been the possessors. It has always been the ones that claim their security interests are being touched. So we are accustomed to this. I'm not saying that this is normal or that this is something that is not deserving concern, but I think that the non-nuclear weapon states, especially the TPNW parties, are going to make the point very strongly that this is a difference and this is an issue between us and them, which is we, the non-nuclear weapon states, have decided to forgo the nuclear option and are continuously upholding to our commitment and our obligations and our position through different treaties that are being implemented by our systems. There are very few instances of countries that have claimed that they are going to leave the NPT regime, for example. Not only one historical experience of a country actually denouncing the NPT, and we don't have claims of states saying that they are going to denounce further treaties from the part of the non-nuclear weapon states. So I wanted to mention that because this is an issue that we have been saying over and over again, especially in the NPT context. The non-nuclear weapon states have been upholding our side of the great bargain. We have been committing and fulfilling our obligations. Of course, because if we don't do it, then we are going to be a subject of sanctions, for example. So the problem is also entrenched into how the UN system is working and how there are some bias in the implementation of treaties and obligations. So from the point of view of our countries, the non-nuclear weapon states, parties to the TPNW, particularly our obligation, and I think our duty is to continue raising the voice on why we have chosen to prohibit nuclear weapons and why this type of weapon is not the basis of our security.
Thank you, Tom. And in this regard, it's important to know that the TPNW, which is in force, prohibits nuclear testing writ large, and this would probably be a good time for the states parties to the TPNW to also reiterate their support for the CTBT and its verification system. Alicia, you have your hand up, please.
Yeah, just to comment on this question as well. I mean, ICAN, of course, we were very concerned about this move by Russia. We worked with the Arms Control Association to co-coordinate a broad civil society letter calling on a condemnation of this move. And indeed, many TPNW states, of course, many states really spoke out against the move to withdraw, to revoke ratification. I think it's important to note that this move by Russia is largely political, normative, in that they, given the status of the CTBT in practice, it doesn't make a big difference, and they've decided to retain their cooperation with the IMS and with the CTBTO. But that's still very concerning. I think it demonstrates the importance of upholding norms against nuclear weapons activities. And that's where you see a big parallel between the CTBT and the TPNW, in that they're both instruments that really seek to uphold prohibitions and norms against nuclear weapons activities. So I think, the wide condemnation of Russia's attempt to in some way undermine politically or normatively the CTBT is very concerning, and underscores the importance of these international instruments to uphold norms against nuclear weapons.
Thank you, and I like how we made the full circle back to the sort of the major underlying push for the TPNW from the get-go, and that being the establishing the norm, pushing the normative value of it. So we've come to the end of our time, and I would like to give you an opportunity, the speakers, if you want to have any concluding remarks, very, very briefly, one minute. Please go for it now. All right, Tonie, please.
I just wanted to mention something that was been repeatedly put in some of the questions, in the questions and answers, which is which states are going to participate as observers. I cannot list the observers at this moment because the registration process is still going on. So I just wanted to mention that observers, states to the meeting of states parties, are not only the ones that oppose the treaty. There are some countries that are not opposed to the treaty, but they are not ready to be states parties, or that they are not signatories or state parties yet. I'm going to give you an example, which is Latin America and the Caribbean. Latin America and the Caribbean has been the driving force of this treaty, because for us, prohibition of nuclear weapons in the region dates 1967. So we have a long history of upholding the prohibition of nuclear weapons through a legally binding treaty. So most of the parties of the TPNW are Latin American. And of the region, just 4 countries have not signed or ratified the treaty. And of those 4, we don't know if they are ready to to participate as observers in the meeting. Just one has confirmed that they are participating as observers, but we don't know yet about the others. So this is an example of how, even if in a region in which a lot of observers or researchers from outside of the region think that we are like-minded, that it is a monolithic position of Latin America and the Caribbean. There are 4 countries that have not joined the TPNW. There is not a single position regarding the treaty, and we don't know yet if they are going to be able to participate as observers, even if they are not fundamentally opposing the treaty. It's maybe a mechanical issue. We know that some countries from the so-called umbrella or extended nuclear deterrence agreements are participating. We know that some neutral countries outside the treaty that are not signatories are going to be participating. We also know that some signatories might be able to participate. It is important to reiterate once again that the the meeting in New York is going to facilitate the participation of small delegations or smaller governments, because they already have a mission in New York, and this is going to, I think, be a very good effect for the inclusivity and participation that we desire. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tonie. Patricia wants to take the floor, especially to answer one of the questions that is posed to her.
Sorry, just to say, I may have misspoken, but when I was talking about the membership of the SARC, these are people nominated by the TPNW states parties. Just to say that. All right,
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so to clarify, the scientists themselves on the scientific advisory group, they can be from states that are not party to the TPNW, but they have to be nominated by states parties to the TPNW.
Sorry if I was unclear.
Thank you very much, Patricia. On the observers, of course, at the first meeting of states parties, the observers were being added basically last minute until the last minute. So we won't really know how many states really are coming until right before the meeting itself. Alicia, did you have any concluding words for us?
No, I think just to underscore that this will be a really important and exciting meeting, and I really encourage you to follow along either in person in New York, join us, or follow along online. We'll be sharing a lot of what's happening, so do stay posted.
Great. Thank you all very much again. Thank you, our wonderful speakers, for sharing the insights and updates. And I'm also looking forward to the meeting of states parties itself, and hopefully we can have another webinar to discuss what transpired and what came out of the meeting. Thank you for joining us on our possible continents, and I hope you have a good day or a good night wherever you might be.